The pipe wrench slipped from my greasy fingers when I heard Andrea's voice cut through our kitchen like a blade through butter. I was lying under the sink in my boxers, wrestling with a leak that had been driving us both crazy for weeks, when she delivered the line that would change everything. "Tonight, you're staying at your parents'. My real boyfriend is coming over." I thought she was joking. Andrea had always been dramatic, prone to theatrical statements when she wanted attention, but then I heard Bryn's voice cackling through the speakerphone, and I realized this wasn't one of her performances. "Tell him about the cabin weekend, too." Bryn's voice crackled with malicious glee. "Eric's been asking when you're finally going to grow a spine." Eric. So the mystery man had a name. I slid out from under the sink, water still dripping onto the linoleum, and looked at my wife of 8 years. Andrea stood there in her perfectly pressed real estate blazer, phone in hand, watching me with the cold satisfaction of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. "You're serious," I said, grabbing a dish towel to wipe the pipe grease from my hands. "Completely serious, Nick. I'm tired of pretending this marriage means anything to me." She gestured around our modest kitchen with its faded wallpaper and second-hand appliances. "I'm tired of this whole charade. My name is Nick Hollis, and I fix things for a living. Cars, mostly, but also lawnmowers, generators, pretty much anything with moving parts. People in our small northern town know they can bring me their broken machinery, and I'll figure out what's wrong. What I couldn't figure out, apparently, was how to fix my own marriage." "How long?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Does it matter?" Andrea shrugged, but I caught the flash of guilt in her eyes. "Pack a bag, Nick. Eric will be here in an hour." I nodded slowly, then walked to the kitchen table where I'd left a manila folder earlier that evening. I'd been meaning to file the documents inside, but now I had a better idea. "Before I go," I said, placing the folder prominently on the table, "you might want to look through this, just some paperwork I've been meaning to organize." Andrea glanced at the folder with mild curiosity. "What kind of paperwork?" "Nothing urgent," I said with a shrug. "Just some old stuff from my previous job. You know how I am about keeping records." The truth was, most people in town knew me as Nick the mechanic. What they didn't know was that before I took over Big Joe's auto shop 5 years ago, I'd worked for a private investigation firm downstate. Nothing glamorous, mostly insurance fraud and background checks, but I'd learned a few useful skills along the way. Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I packed a bag while Andrea primped in the bathroom, applying makeup for her evening with Eric. The whole situation felt surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart in slow motion. "Don't forget to lock up," she called as I headed for the door. "Wouldn't dream of it," I replied. I drove to my parents' house on the other side of town, my mind racing despite my outward calm. Mom and Dad were visiting my sister in Florida, so I had the place to myself. I sat in their living room, surrounded by family photos and the lingering scent of Mom's lavender air freshener, trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Big Joe. "Poker night at Murphy's. You in?" I almost said yes, then decided I wasn't ready for company. Instead, I opened a beer from Dad's refrigerator and tried to make sense of the evening. Andrea had blindsided me, but looking back, I realized the signs had been there for months. The late nights, showing properties, the new clothes, the way she'd started talking about our neighborhood like it was beneath her. I must have dozed off on the couch because my phone jolting to life at 2 a.m. nearly gave me a heart attack. The screen showed 33 missed calls and a stream of increasingly frantic text messages from Andrea. The most recent one made me sit up straight. "Please come back. He saw your documents, Googled your name, and left in fear. Who are you?" I smiled in the darkness of my parents' living room. Those documents I'd left on the table weren't anything special, just old case files from my investigation days, with my name prominently displayed on the letterhead. But to someone with secrets to hide, they might look pretty intimidating. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Andrea. "Nick, I'm scared. Why did Eric run? What was in that folder?" I turned off my phone and went back to sleep. The next morning, I drove back to Willow Street with a cup of gas station coffee and a clearer head. Mrs. Beale was already stationed on her front porch, tending to her flower boxes with the dedication of a surveillance expert. She'd lived next door to Andrea and me for 3 years, and I'd learned that nothing happened on our street without her knowledge. "Morning, Nick," she called as I pulled into my driveway. "Rough night?" "You could say that." I walked over to her fence, noting the way her eyes sparkled with curiosity. Mrs. Beale was 72 and had perfected the art of extracting neighborhood gossip through seemingly innocent conversation. I couldn't help but notice some commotion last night, she said, adjusting her gardening gloves. A gold BMW in your driveway around 9, then a lot of shouting around 2. Everything all right? Just working through some marital issues, I said diplomatically. Mrs. Beale nodded knowingly. That young man in the fancy car left in quite a hurry, peeled out of here like his pants were on fire. Andrea was on the porch in her nightgown, calling after him. Interesting. So Eric had fled immediately after seeing those documents. Whatever he was hiding, it was serious enough to send him running from what he'd probably thought would be an easy conquest. Thanks for keeping an eye on things, Mrs. Beale. Any time, dear. That's what neighbors are for. I found Andrea in our kitchen, still in the same clothes from the night before. Her perfect makeup was smeared, and she looked like she hadn't slept. The manila folder lay open on the table, its contents scattered across the surface. These are investigation reports, she said without looking up. You worked for a private detective agency. Among other things. I poured myself another cup of coffee, noting how her hands trembled as she shuffled through the papers. Why didn't you ever tell me? You never asked about my previous jobs. You always seemed more interested in forgetting my past than learning about it. Andrea finally looked at me, and I saw something I'd never seen in her eyes before. Genuine fear. Eric thinks you're some kind of professional investigator. He thinks you've been watching us. Have I been watching you? I asked mildly. Have you? Her voice cracked slightly. Instead of answering, I walked to the basement door. I need to get some tools from downstairs. We should probably talk about how we're going to handle the divorce. Divorce? Andrea followed me to the top of the stairs. Nick, maybe we should slow down. Think about this. You told me to leave so your boyfriend could come over. I'd say we're past the thinking stage. I descended into our basement, a cluttered space filled with holiday decorations, old furniture, and my collection of spare parts. Andrea didn't follow. She'd always hated the basement, claiming it was too dusty and dark, which was probably why she'd never noticed the small hiding spot behind the water heater where I'd discovered something very interesting 6 months ago. The burner phone was exactly where I'd left it, wrapped in a plastic bag and tucked behind a loose piece of insulation. I'd found it by accident while fixing a leak in the basement plumbing. It had fallen out of a box of Andrea's old real estate files, and curiosity had gotten the better of me. The phone contained 2 years' worth of text messages between Andrea and Eric, along with photos and what looked like financial records. I'd been too shocked to confront her at the time, instead choosing to document everything and wait to see how far she'd take her betrayal. Now I had my answer. I scrolled through the messages, refreshing my memory of their relationship timeline. It had started as flirtation during a real estate conference in Boston, evolved into an emotional affair, and eventually become something much more calculated. Eric, it turned out, was more than just Andrea's boyfriend. He was her business partner in a scheme to skim money from her real estate commissions. They'd been funneling cash through a series of fake transactions with Bryn's help, building a nest egg for their planned future together, a future that apparently didn't include me. I climbed back upstairs to find Andrea pacing in the kitchen, chewing her perfectly manicured nails. Where did Eric go? I asked. I don't know. He won't answer his phone. She turned to face me, and I saw desperation creeping into her expression. Nick, whatever you think you know. I don't think anything, I interrupted, but I am curious about something. I pulled out my phone and showed her a photo I'd taken of the burner phone's screen the night I discovered it. Andrea went pale. Where did you get that? Your basement hiding spot isn't as clever as you thought. I put my phone away and picked up my tool bag. I'm going to work. We can discuss the divorce arrangements tonight. Nick, wait. But I was already walking out the door, leaving my wife to contemplate just how much I might know about her secret life. Big Joe's auto shop sat on the edge of town like a monument to honest work and straight talk. Joe had owned the place for 30 years before selling it to me, but he still came in most days to drink coffee, dispense wisdom, and provide commentary on the moral failings of our customers. You look like hell, he said when I walked in that morning. Andrea's having an affair. Joe nodded, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Figured that was coming. She's been acting too good for this place lately. Too good for you, too, if you don't mind me saying. I did mind, but Joe was right. Andrea had been pulling away from our life together for months, making it clear that she considered herself destined for better things. The boyfriend's name is Eric Phelps, I said, pulling on my work coveralls. Drives a gold BMW, thinks he's God's gift to womankind. What are you going to do about it? I considered the question while I organized my tools. What was I going to do? The old Nick would have probably confronted them both, demanded explanations, maybe tried to save his marriage through counseling and compromise. But the old Nick hadn't known about the burner phone. The old Nick hadn't realized his wife was stealing money to fund her escape plan. "I'm going to make them regret underestimating me," I said finally. Joe grinned, revealing teeth stained by 40 years of coffee and cigarettes. "Now you're talking. What do you need?" The first step was reconnaissance. I spent my lunch break driving around town, looking for Eric's distinctive BMW. I found it parked outside Riverside Apartments, the newest and most expensive complex in our area, the kind of place that catered to young professionals who wanted luxury amenities without the commitment of buying a house. I parked across the street and observed the building for 20 minutes. Eric emerged around 1:30, dressed in an expensive suit and talking loudly on his phone. Even from a distance, I could see the arrogance in his posture, the way he gestured dismissively while speaking to whoever was on the other end of the call. He climbed into his BMW and drove away, probably heading to whatever job allowed him to afford his lifestyle. I waited another 10 minutes, then approached his car's usual parking spot to examine the area. The apartment complex had decent security cameras, but they were positioned to monitor the main entrances, not the parking lot. The spot where Eric parked was partially hidden by a decorative hedge, providing cover for anyone who might want to get close to his precious BMW. That evening I returned with a small toolkit and a can of spray paint. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I'm not ashamed of it either. Eric had spent months manipulating my wife, helping her steal money from our joint accounts, and planning a future that involved discarding me like an old piece of furniture. The BMW's alarm system was more sophisticated than most, but I'd learned a few things about automotive electronics over the years. It took me 15 minutes to disable the sensors without triggering any alerts. Then I got creative. I didn't slash his tires or break his windows. That would have been too obvious, too easily traced back to the angry husband. Instead, I focused on subtle sabotage that would cause maximum frustration with minimal evidence. A small amount of sugar in the gas tank, loosened bolts on the exhaust system, disconnected wires in the sound system, and finally, painted in neat block letters across the hood, cheater. By the time I finished, Eric's status symbol looked like a rolling billboard for infidelity. I packed up my tools and drove home, feeling more satisfied than I had in months. Andrea was waiting for me with dinner prepared and candles lit on our dining room table. She'd changed into the dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she claimed was too fancy for our usual restaurants. "I thought we should talk," she said, her voice artificially sweet. "About the divorce? About us? About saving our marriage?" She gestured to the elaborate meal she'd prepared. "I made your favorite." I sat down and took a bite of the pot roast. It was perfectly seasoned, exactly the way I liked it. Andrea was many things, but she'd always been a good cook. "This is delicious," I said. "What's the occasion?" "I want to apologize for last night. I was confused, emotional. I didn't mean what I said about Eric." "So he's not your boyfriend?" Andrea hesitated just long enough to confirm that she was lying. "He's a client. Sometimes the relationship gets too friendly, but it's nothing serious." "I see." I continued eating, watching her squirm under my calm demeanor. "And the money you've been transferring to his accounts?" Her fork clattered against her plate. "What money?" "The commissions from the Henderson sale, the Thompson property. Should I go on?" Andrea's face flushed red, then went pale. "How do you know about those transactions?" "I told you, I keep records of everything." I finished my pot roast and stood up. "Thank you for dinner. It was excellent. Nick, please, we can work this out." "I'm sure we can. But first, you need to understand that I'm not the same man who crawled out from under that sink last night. That man was naive enough to trust his wife. This man knows better." I left her sitting at the candlelit table and went upstairs to pack more of my belongings. Through the bedroom window, I could see Mrs. Beale's porch light glowing in the darkness. She was probably inside, watching the evening news and wondering about the drama unfolding next door. Tomorrow, I thought, the whole town would have something to talk about. My phone rang at 6 a.m, jolting me awake on my parents' couch. The caller ID showed a number I hadn't seen in 2 years. My brother Eli. "Heard you're having some marital troubles," he said without preamble. "News travels fast." I sat up, running a hand through my hair. "Where are you calling from?" "I'm in town. Drove up last night after Mom called me about you staying at the house." Eli Hollis was 3 years younger than me, and everything I wasn't. College-educated, ambitious, and completely unwilling to settle for small-town life. He'd left for the State Police Academy right after high school and hadn't looked back. We'd grown apart over the years, our relationship strained by distance and different life choices. "What brings you back to our humble corner of nowhere?" I asked. Vacation time I needed to use before the end of the year. Plus, I wanted to see how you were handling your situation. My situation? Andrea's affair. The money laundering. The boyfriend who's probably wanted in 3 states for various financial crimes. I nearly dropped the phone. How do you know about Eric? Because I ran his plates last night after I saw his car parked outside Riverside Apartments. Eric Phelps has quite an interesting background. Want to grab breakfast and discuss it? We met at Mel's Diner, the kind of place that served coffee strong enough to wake the deceased and hash browns that could cure any hangover. Eli looked exactly like what he was, a state police detective who spent his days dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. His hair was shorter than mine, his clothes more expensive, and his eyes held the wary alertness of someone who'd seen too much. So, he said after we'd ordered, tell me about your marriage. I gave him the abbreviated version. Andrea's growing dissatisfaction, her affair with Eric, the burner phone I'd discovered, and the financial irregularities I'd uncovered. You've been busy, Eli said when I finished. Most people would have just filed for divorce. Most people don't have wives who've been stealing from them for 2 years. Fair point. Eli pulled out a small notebook and flipped through several pages. Eric Phelps, age 31, originally from Connecticut. He's got a pattern of targeting women in real estate and other commission-based businesses. Usually starts with romance, evolves into financial manipulation. Usually? You're not his first victim, Nick. Andrea's just the latest in a string of women he's used to fund his lifestyle. The difference is, most of his previous targets didn't have husbands who knew how to fight back. Our food arrived, and I took a moment to process what Eli had told me. Eric wasn't just an opportunistic cheater. He was a professional con artist who targeted my wife specifically for her access to real estate commissions. What happened to his other victims? Bankruptcy, mostly. He'd drain their accounts, disappear, and surface somewhere else with a new identity. Very careful about staying just inside the legal boundaries. But not careful enough to avoid a background check. Apparently not. Eli smiled grimly. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? I thought about Andrea sitting at our candlelit table the night before, trying to manipulate me with pot roast and fake remorse. I thought about Eric's arrogant posture outside his apartment building, completely confident that he was smarter than everyone around him. I want them to understand what it feels like to be humiliated, I said finally. I want the whole town to know exactly who they are. That can be arranged. Eli closed his notebook and leaned back in his booth. But we'll need to be smart about it. And we'll need help. What kind of help? The kind that comes from people who've been watching Andrea and Bryn's business practices with growing suspicion, people who might be interested in seeing justice served. After breakfast, we drove to Big Joe's shop, where I introduced Eli to my business partner and explained our situation. Joe listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or grunting his approval. So, you want to expose them publicly, Joe said when we finished. In a way that destroys their credibility and their business relationships, I confirmed. And you want to make sure Eric understands that he picked the wrong town to run his con game in, Eli added. Joe smiled, the same predatory grin I'd seen when he negotiated with difficult customers. I know just the place to do it. The annual Founders' Day celebration was scheduled for the following weekend. The entire town would gather in the public square for food, music, and speeches from local business leaders. Andrea and Bryn had volunteered to help organize the event, seeing it as an opportunity to network with potential clients. They'll be expecting recognition for their community service, Joe explained. Instead, they'll get something they'll never forget. What about Eric? I asked. Leave him to me, Eli said. I have some ideas about how to handle your wife's boyfriend. That afternoon, I returned to Willow Street to collect more of my belongings. Andrea's car was gone, probably showing properties or meeting with Bryn to strategize their next move. I used the opportunity to search the house more thoroughly, looking for additional evidence of their financial schemes. In Andrea's home office, I found a second laptop hidden behind a stack of real estate magazines. The computer was password protected, but I'd learned a few things about digital security during my investigation days. It took me an hour to crack her login credentials. The laptop contained detailed records of every fraudulent transaction, every forged document, every lie Andrea and Bryn had told to their clients and business partners. They'd been skimming money for years, not just from recent sales, but from dozens of previous deals. I copied everything to a flash drive and prepared to leave. As I was locking up the house, Mrs. Beale appeared at her fence. Your wife had visitors today, she said conversationally. Oh? That Bryn woman and a man I didn't recognize. They seemed very agitated about something, lots of pointing and raised voices. Probably just business stress, I said diplomatically. Mrs. Beale adjusted her gardening gloves with the air of someone who knew more than she was saying. "Well, I hope everything works out for the best." "I'm sure it will, Mrs. Beale. I'm sure it will." The night before Founders' Day, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my parents' couch, staring at the ceiling and running through our plan one final time. Everything had to work perfectly, or Andrea and Eric would slip away to start their con game somewhere else. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Meet me at Murphy's bar in 1 hour. Come alone." E. Eric wanted a face-to-face meeting. After 3 days of hiding, he'd finally worked up the courage to confront me directly. I arrived at Murphy's to find him sitting in a corner booth, nursing a beer and trying to look intimidating. The spray paint had been removed from his BMW, but I could see scratches in the hood where someone had scrubbed too aggressively. "Nick Hollis," he said as I approached, the mysterious husband. "Eric Phelps," I replied, sliding into the booth across from him. "The professional con artist." His confident smile faltered slightly. "I don't know what you think you know. I know you've been running the same scam in 4 different states over the past 6 years. I know you target women in commission-based businesses. I know you're wanted for questioning in Connecticut regarding a real estate fraud case." Eric's face went pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo of his criminal background check. "My brother's a state police detective, very thorough researcher." "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that you made a mistake when you chose my wife as your next victim." Eric leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen, we can work something out. I'll disappear, leave Andrea alone, and you can have your boring little marriage back." "Too late for that." I stood up, leaving him sitting in the booth. "Tomorrow, everyone in this town is going to know exactly who you are and what you've been doing. I suggest you use tonight to figure out how you're going to explain yourself." I walked away without looking back, but I could feel his eyes following me to the door. Founders' Day dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for an outdoor celebration. The town square filled with families, local business owners, and curious residents eager to enjoy the festivities. A small stage had been erected near the gazebo, equipped with a microphone and large video screens for the evening's presentations. Andrea and Bryn arrived early, dressed in matching business suits and carrying clipboards like generals preparing for battle. They moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, shaking hands and exchanging business cards with potential clients. I watched from across the square, noting how comfortable they looked in their roles as respected community members. That comfort was about to be shattered. Eli appeared beside me, dressed in casual clothes, but maintaining the alert posture of a law enforcement officer. "Everything's ready," he said quietly. "Joe's handling the technical setup, and I've got backup positioned around the perimeter." "Backup?" "A few colleagues who happen to be in the area, just in case Eric decides to cause trouble." The afternoon passed slowly, filled with local band performances, children's activities, and speeches from various civic leaders. Andrea and Bryn were scheduled to speak during the evening program, representing the local business community. As sunset approached, the crowd gathered around the stage for the final presentations. Andrea stepped up to the microphone, radiant with confidence and completely unaware of what was about to happen. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the square's sound system. "As representatives of the local real estate community, Bryn and I want to thank you for making this such a wonderful celebration." The crowd applauded politely. I noticed Eric standing near the back, watching nervously as Andrea continued her speech. "We're proud to be part of this community," Andrea continued, "and we're committed to maintaining the highest standards of professional integrity in all our business dealings." That was Joe's cue. The video screens flickered, then displayed the first batch of documents I'd copied from Andrea's hidden laptop. Bank records showing suspicious transfers, forged signatures on real estate contracts, and detailed notes about their money laundering operation. The crowd's polite attention turned to confused murmuring as people tried to understand what they were seeing. Andrea stopped mid-sentence, her face draining of color as she recognized her own handwriting on the screen. "These documents," I said, stepping onto the stage and taking the microphone from Andrea's nerveless fingers, "show how my wife and her business partner have been defrauding their clients for the past 2 years." The murmuring became a roar of shocked voices. Bryn tried to flee, but found her path blocked by several large men who'd positioned themselves strategically around the square. "The man in the back," I continued, pointing toward Eric, "is Eric Phelps, a professional con artist who's been helping them funnel stolen money through fake transactions. He's wanted for questioning in multiple states for similar crimes." Eric pushed through the crowd, trying to reach his car, but Eli intercepted him with the casual efficiency of someone who'd spent years apprehending fleeing suspects. "I think you'll want to stick around for the rest of the presentation," Eli said, his hand firmly gripping Eric's arm. The video screens continued cycling through evidence, photos of Eric and Andrea together, copies of the burner phone's text messages, and financial records showing the full scope of their operation. "My wife told me she was tired of our marriage," I said to the stunned crowd. "What she didn't tell me was that she'd been stealing money to fund her escape plan. What she didn't know was that her boyfriend had done this before, to other women in other towns." Andrea finally found her voice. "Nick, please." "Please what? Please pretend I didn't find your burner phone? Please ignore the fact that you've been living a double life for 2 years? Please let you and your criminal boyfriend disappear with stolen money?" The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I could see Mrs. Beale in the front row, her eyes wide with fascination. "I'm not asking for sympathy," I continued. "I'm asking for justice. These people betrayed not just me, but every client who trusted them with the biggest financial transactions of their lives." Bryn finally tried to speak. "This is all a misunderstanding." "The only misunderstanding," I interrupted, "was thinking you were smart enough to get away with it." Eric made one last attempt to flee, breaking free from Eli's grip and sprinting toward the parking area. The crowd parted to let him through, but his escape was short-lived. His BMW, sabotaged once again, refused to start. He sat in the driver's seat, frantically turning the key while the engine made pathetic, whining sounds. The crowd began to laugh, a sound that started as nervous chuckling and grew into full-throated amusement. Eric abandoned his car and tried to run on foot, but Eli caught him easily. "Eric Phelps," Eli announced loudly. "You're under arrest for suspicion of fraud and conspiracy." The evening ended with Eric in handcuffs, Andrea and Bryn facing a crowd of angry former clients, and me standing on the stage with a sense of satisfaction I'd never experienced before. The aftermath of Founders Day was everything I'd hoped for and more. By morning, the story had spread throughout the county, picked up by local news stations, and shared endlessly on social media. Andrea and Bryn's real estate business collapsed overnight as clients demanded investigations into their transactions and threatened lawsuits. Eric was transferred to Connecticut to face charges related to his previous cons, but not before spending 3 days in our local jail, where he discovered that small-town law enforcement took a dim view of outsiders who preyed on local residents. I returned to our house on Willow Street to find Andrea packing boxes in the living room. She looked older somehow, as if the stress of exposure had aged her years in a matter of days. "I suppose you're satisfied," she said without looking up from her packing. "I'm satisfied that justice was served," I replied. "I'm satisfied that you can't hurt anyone else the way you hurt me." We could have worked things out privately. There was no need to humiliate me in front of the entire town. I stared at her, amazed by her ability to cast herself as the victim even now. "You mean the way you humiliated me when you told me to leave so your boyfriend could come over? The way you humiliated me every time you stole money from our joint accounts to fund your affair?" Andrea finally looked at me, and I saw something that might have been genuine remorse in her eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far." "But it did go this far, and now you have to live with the consequences?" She finished packing her box and sealed it with tape. "Where am I supposed to go? My business is ruined, my reputation is destroyed, and I don't have any money left. You should have thought about that before you decided to become a criminal. I'm still your wife. Not for much longer. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings." Andrea picked up her box and walked toward the door, then turned back for one final attempt at manipulation. "You know, Nick, you're not the man I married. The old Nick would have forgiven me." "You're right," I said. "The old Nick would have forgiven you, taken you back, and spent the rest of his life wondering when you'd betray him again. But the old Nick didn't know who you really were." She left without another word, loading her boxes into a rental car and driving away from Willow Street forever. That evening, I sat on my front porch with a beer, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Mrs. Beale appeared at her fence carrying a plate of homemade cookies. "I thought you might be hungry," she said, offering me the plate. "Thank you, Mrs. Beale. That's very thoughtful." "Quite a week we've had," she observed, settling into the lawn chair I kept on the porch for her visits. "Quite a week indeed." I always knew there was something not right about that Andrea. Too slick, too eager to impress people with money she couldn't account for. "You never mentioned your suspicions." "Wasn't my place to interfere in a marriage, but I'm glad you figured it out on your own." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. My phone buzzed with a text from Eli. "Heading back to the capital tomorrow. Proud of how you handled everything." Another message came from Big Joe. Shop's been busy all day. Seems like half the town wants to shake your hand and get their cars serviced by the man who took down the con artists. I smiled, realizing that my reputation in town had changed overnight. I was no longer just Nick the mechanic who couldn't keep his wife happy. Now I was Nick the man who'd fought back against betrayal and won. "What will you do now?" Mrs. Beale asked. "Keep fixing things," I said. "Cars, mostly, but maybe other problems, too. Turns out I'm pretty good at solving puzzles when I put my mind to it." "And romance? Will you be looking for a new wife?" I considered the question while finishing my beer. "Maybe someday, but first, I think I'll enjoy being single for a while. Enjoy the peace and quiet of a house where I don't have to worry about hidden phones or secret bank accounts." Mrs. Beale nodded approvingly. A man should know his own worth before he shares his life with someone else. As she gathered up her empty cookie plate and prepared to return to her own house, I reflected on the events of the past week. Andrea had tried to discard me like an outdated appliance, assuming I'd accept my fate with quiet resignation. Instead, I'd reminded her, and everyone else, that underestimating people can be a costly mistake. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a weight I'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. I locked the front door and turned off the porch light, ready to start the next chapter of my life. Tomorrow, there would be cars to fix, a business to run, and a reputation to maintain. But tonight, I was content to sit in my reclaimed home, surrounded by the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Andrea had been right about one thing. I wasn't the same man she'd married. I was better.